Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to talk about a couple of books that I've been enjoying, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them so that you can determine whether or not you may enjoy them too. Now, the first one is Babylonia by an author I discovered a couple of years ago, Costanza Casati. I discovered her with her novel Clytemnestra, and now in Babylonia she continues in the subgenre. It's basically her thing to take female figures who are generally presented as close to pure evil and writing them as complex characters who, while you may not approve of their actions, at least you can understand them, and essentially giving them a voice to tell their side of the story. Now, in Babylonia, we switch from ancient Greek mythology to Assyrian history. This is less a work of fantasy, although there are a few tiny little fantastic elements that creep in, and more of a work of historical fiction. The tagline on the cover is Kings Fall, Queens Rise. Now, from that tagline, I have no doubt that you and pretty much everybody else would be led to expect rah rah girl power. And yet, that's really not what this book is. It's a lot more complicated than that. Inside, the cover gives you a little bit more of a nuanced picture. A common woman, the governor she married, the king who loved them both. So, with that, the cover makes clear that we're talking about three major characters, all of whom are complex people and all of whom have their particular perspective, particular point of view, and are developed in the detail that I remember respecting a lot in Clytemnestra, where you don't necessarily approve of everything that they're doing and thinking, but you can see where they're coming from. It, I won't say forces you, but it enables you to look at the situations from their perspective. Now, Clytemnestra had a clear villain because it's basically asking you to look at a story from the point of view of a woman whose husband, first of all, her husband Agamemnon killed or had killed her previous husband, whom she loved. And then, after essentially raping her and forcing her to give him kids, murders her eldest daughter and is able to do this without a single shred of remorse or sense of loss because the girl essentially means nothing to him. She's a girl. And it's basically left to Clytemnestra to get justice for Iphigenia. That's her main motivator. And it's hard not to understand exactly how she feels about this whole situation. The story gives her no reason whatsoever to love, respect, or like this man who forced himself on her in more ways than one. But in Babylonia, you don't really have a clear villain among the three major characters, that they are cast in interesting shades of gray. Now, the woman in this story who has been villainized um, in history is Semiramis. She was tagged the whore of Babylon by 19th century clergymen. And yet, she does things that are a little bit morally ambiguous, but her perspective is intriguing And there are points when we do genuinely root for her. So if you want a story that does have romance, but it's very complicated romance, it's somewhat dark, not in the way of violence or torture or BDSM or anything like that, but dark in that it brings out complicated emotions in the characters involved. And if you think that's what you would like, story of a common woman, as the book jacket says, who is going to do what she needs to do to survive, but is holding on to at least some kind of moral compass. If that sounds interesting to you, then pick up Babylonia by Costanza Casati. Got to get her name right. And you will find it very involving. The prose is strong, and she gets away with doing something that normally gets on my nerves. She writes in present tense. These days, the present tense narration has become so trendy, so fashionable, that it's starting to get on my nerves. But Casati honestly gets away with it because her prose is just that strong. So, recommended for those who like complex female characters, complicated romantic situations, and a mingling of triumph and loss. There is a sense of triumph combined very interestingly with a sense of loss in this book, and I cannot explain it further on account of their spoilerish. We'd be getting into spoilerish territory. Now, the other book that I want to tell you about is one that I'm actually still reading. I'm in the last third of it. It's by Alix E. Harrow. It's called The Everlasting. Now, Alix E. Harrow is another writer I discovered in the 2020s. The 10,000 Doors of January, a very good book, or at least I found it to be really absorbing, and I loved the energetic and vivid prose that Harrow was bringing to the table. Now, she was writing in first person, so the energetic prose matched the narrator, the protagonist that we were getting, in a very effective and creative way. Then her next book, The Once and Future Witches, read that, loved it as well. Again, Harrow is a very strong writer when it comes to prose, effective, vivid yet not overly flowery, not purple prose, but vivid, energetic. I know I've used that word a lot today, and engrossing, involving, and the prose matches the particular story that Harrow is trying to tell. Now, Starling House, the next novel by her, I haven't picked that up yet. I'm not sure I'm going to because Alix E. Harrow does in that book something that another favorite writer of mine, Naomi Novik, also did. She went contemporary. Now, some writers of fantasy, once they go contemporary, they never go back. Patricia Briggs, author of the Mercy Thompson books, is one of the more notable examples. She used to write traditional fantasy, but then after the first Mercy Thompson book became so successful, she just stayed in that contemporary world, and urban fantasy is pretty much all she writes now. I hope that we don't see that happen to Naomi Novik. If she wants to write contemporary, fine, but I hope she will move back and forth between the contemporary stories and stories more like Uprooted and Spinning Silver, which I really loved by her. Well, with The Everlasting, Alix E. Harrow has veered away from the strictly recognizable contemporary with cell phones and all that sort of thing, and into a fictional country called the Dominion, and it is divided between a quasi Arthurian setting and a post war. It feels like the late 40s, early 50s, maybe, but it isn't specifically stated to be that. We're not even sure if the war described in this story is meant to be analogous to World War One or World War Two, but it certainly doesn't have all the appurtenances of the contemporary world as we know and live it. And you have the two main characters, one whose home is in that Arthurian world, and the other one whose home is in this post war time. And it is a cross time love story. And it's a very well told love story. Love stories are hard to get right. In fact, they are more often than not gotten wrong, which is why when a lot of people ask for recommendations for fantasy, they say no romance, please. They say no romance or minimal romance. That a lot of fantasy readers are kind of turning against love stories because a lot of rather poorly written stories have poisoned the well. But Harrow, again, is one of my favorite prose writers that I've discovered not just this decade, but this millennium. And she knows how to make the feeling believable, interesting, and to create these characters who are, again, using the word complex because they are flawed. They are caught in situations where they're not sure what the right thing to do is, but you root for them. And again, you have a kind of in this story the prose is a little bit more lyrical, not flowery, not purple, but a little bit more lyrical than say what I found in the 10,000 um, Doors of January and the Once and Future Witches. And that kind of style suits this book because, again, it is a love story that transcends time. And it also, much like Costanza Casati, makes me forgive the use of present tense because the prose is just that good. Alix E. Harrow is able to do something that a lot of writers can't make work. She uses the second person so that you have these two characters taking turns telling each other their stories. And she makes it work. It could be annoying as heck, but again, she makes it work. So these are two books that I have found very interesting in my reading this year. You might like them too if they sound like the kind of thing you would like. Well, just remember, when I recommend a book, the question that is often asked is it any good? And I tend to respond with, I liked it because good is so much in the eye of the beholder. But there's a lot to recommend these two books. So happy reading, and may your reading life be filled with energy, complexity, and hope. Thank you.